All right, guys, welcome in. It is, I can't believe it, Friday, November the 15th. Oh, my word, where has the time gone? I mean, between the college football, the NFL, here we are now, Ralph, a couple of weeks into the college basketball season. 47-some-odd games on the card here tonight. It is another edition of the Happy Hour Tip-Off Show, brought to you by WagerTalk.com. He is Ralph Michaels at Cal Sports LV. I'm Joe Raineri at Joe Raineri. Make sure you guys are telling us on Twitter and get ready. Profitable night last night on a short card, 18 games. You know, you got 4 times the amount of games here tonight, Ralph, and heading into the weekend, which should be awesome. Heading into tournaments, which will be awesome in the next couple of weeks. But there were some games. I mean, it was a short card, but there were some fun games last night on the board.
Yeah, you know, the difference with this season is the way the schedule is set up. With the ACC games the first week, with these Gavitt games coming in, there's been premium games or marquee games each day that we've been able to watch and follow and learn. And, you know, we get to see a lot of good teams. We get to see a lot of good players have great performances. We'll talk about some of those in a minute. But, yeah, it's nice to have some of these big games early, and we have a couple more we're going to talk about later tonight with Gonzaga and A&M and the Backyard Brawl.
Yeah, well, we got some fun stuff last night and some monster performances last night, Ralph. I mean, some guys that really, and again, I think we do this purposely so we can get folks acclimated because we hear it all the time. Who's the next Zion? Who's going to be the one? You know, well, first of all, Wiseman, it looks like we're not going to see him anymore, so he's gone. So that's probably a name you probably won't hear until draft time. But there are some folks here, Ralph, that people should get acclimated to.
Yeah. Where you have a kid for, you know, Evansville, DeAndre Williams, who may not get to the NBA, but he is as or more important to his Aces team than some of those superstars are to their team. So by just hearing the names of the leading scorers and those bigger performances, I learned. I mean, there's a lot of kids that have freshmen that weren't supposed to be ranked that high, and all of a sudden, you know, grew an extra inch in the summer or put on weight with their, you know, with the camp, and all of a sudden, boom, they're turning into superstars. You know, let's talk about Najee, Zeke Najee at Arizona. Played San Jose, so played a very weak foe. But in 21 minutes played, he had 26 points, 11 rebounds. We had Gilliard from Richmond. They played Vanderbilt. In 40 minutes, he had 26 points, 4 assists, 7 steals. Anytime you're getting 7 steals in a college basketball game, I mean, that tells you are a legit quality defender in the game. And, you know, let's bring up Miles Powell. Yeah. We weren't sure if he was going to play. Yep. It was a question mark. Well, we talked about liking the under if he didn't play, and we liked about Michigan State. Bet Michigan State, if you saw him in street clothes, well, guess what? He wasn't in street clothes. 37 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. That's why we were going to fade Seton Hall. If he wasn't there, he was that big of a contributor.
Yep. Yeah, and you had Naismith and Vanderbilt Richmond in a losing effort, too. Another 34 points dropping in there. You had Nathan Ko at Richmond. And that whole game, actually, it was really those two guys that were dominating. He dropped 34. DeAndre Williams. We keep hearing this name, Ralph, now. In the first couple of weeks, DeAndre Williams at Evansville. We keep hearing this, don't we?
Yeah, you know, 23-13, double-double machine, and he's going to keep doing that for the Aces.
Yeah, and I think they're still playing St. Mary's, aren't they? What a slow-ass team that. My God, it's like watching paint dry watching them play, Ralph.
Yeah, well, they still scored more than I thought yesterday, that's for sure. You know, they got into, the 80s? So you don't see St. Mary's getting into those 80s very often. Long Beach State is a team that, again, has prepped the tempo. That game was, I think 81-63. And, you know, it was paced. St. Mary's at 41 and a half, ended up with those 81 points.
Yep. And we did have, of course, Ralph, last night, we had some blowout covers type of situation there, where there was some teams that kind of they not only won, but they covered, and they covered. Oh, wow, they covered well. You had San Diego. How about San Diego Weber State? It was a game that we talked about here on the show yesterday. They only covered by 17.5. The spread was 2.5 there, so that was 71-56. And this was a game, of course, I think that was my money line dog of the day was Penn State, who went to Georgetown, took on Patrick Ewing and his crew there, and they dominated the first half, Ralph. They I thought Georgetown would make a run in the second, but they dominated the second half too as well. They won by 17.5, 81-66. Penn State was getting 2.5 points there. And then what the hell was that with San Jose State? You warned us about this game last night, Ralph, about San Jose State and Arizona. First of all, I thought Sean Miller was in jail. How is he still? Now he's getting recruits from everywhere. They're putting up 90 points last night, almost 90 points, 87-39. They were laying 31, and they still covered by 17, Ralph.
Yeah, Joe, just going back a minute, we talked about yesterday's card, and it was a very light card. That's why we're not talking about many big covers. But, there were only 2 upsets last night. Mm-hmm. And they happened to be both teams that we used on the money line parlay. So, hey, a nice 2-0 sweep for that.
Yep.
Of course, San Diego, you talked about them, and Penn State. So those were 2 of the biggest covers. Those were the only 2 upsets. And I don't know if you can call 2.5-point dogs an upset, but for this purpose, we did. And, anytime we talk top covers, we also want to talk the top total or over or under covers. Richmond Vanderbilt, again, an overtime game, but still it was over anyway in regulation. They went over by 42 points. The total for that game was 143. The final 93-92. St. Francis and Longwood went over by 20.5 points, a total of 142.5. It was 86-87. Embarrassingly, I'm going to bring this game up.
Oh, boy.
This was one that I liked, and I gave it out as a best bet on over the total. And, boy, you see it went under by 31 points, just an ugly, ugly game. East Tennessee State and Winthrop, a total was 148. I have 150 down here where it ended up closing. Final was 61-58. 2 other games that went way under. We talked about Harvard perhaps having a banged-up team and not playing some guys. Well, that went under by 27 points. And Mississippi State and ULM. Mississippi State's defense shut down a poor ULM team, holding them to 45 points. That game went under by 25.5 points with a total of 132. So, we saw a low total. People tend to shy away from those 132s, those high 128s, thinking there's not value at the under. But you get a team like Mississippi State, and it shows you that even with a 132.5, it went under by 25.5 points.
Yep. And, of course, guys, right around this time, too, we always like to deliver, Ralph likes to deliver, on his TNA, man, trends and angles as we head into a 40-plus game card here tonight, Ralph. And what are some of the trends and angles that popped out to you here today?
Well, I'm going to give you 2, Joe, to start. And the reason I'm giving you these is really just to explain. You can cherry pick data all you want. I can come up with trends on any team if I'm just looking for a trend to get me to 6-1 or 7-1. Off a game where they had 18 assists and 5 steals and they called 4 timeouts in the first half. You know what I mean? When you have options in the database, you can always come up with angles. Now, I want to give these 2 angles out to show our viewers, to help our viewers, and to make it clear to them, you are analyzing data when you're looking at trends. Do the trends match up with the situation that you like? Do you have a home court edge where you're doing well ATS? Is the opponent poor on the road ATS? Well, how about if I told you Minnesota was 0-13 over-under as an away dog?
Wow.
14 games, their last 14 as an away dog. They've gone 0 overs, 13 unders, and 1 push. Wow. Great angle. Okay, what if a little bit later I tell you Utah as a favorite, 10 overs, no unders.
Really?
Another great angle.
Right.
Guess what?
Oh, no.
Minnesota's playing Utah.
Okay.
So, again, if I just gave you one of those angles, you might bet it.
Yeah, that's correct.
If I gave you the other angle, you might bet it.
Yep.
But you have to look at both sides of the story. We have an 0-13 on one side, a 10-0 on the other side, going against each other. So what do? You rip it up. You do nothing. You don't play the total if those are the only reasons you like the game. So, Bama 1-10 over under on the road. Again, when you're going from one season to the next, though, like we are now, make sure these trends and the coaches are playing the same style. Western Kentucky 10-2 ATS as a road team. They've been a solid road team. I do like them. And Duke 13-4 against the spread in November the last 3 years. Coach K has his kids ready. You know, we didn't know how those young freshmen were going to handle last year, but again, he has this ready to play. One more thing I want to throw in here, and this is something I just tweeted out. So if you follow me at Twitter at CalSportsLV, or you start following today, go back and look at this. Jeff Goodman from Watch Stadium did a great article back a couple months ago, and I just retweeted it and wanted to give him credit and get the names out here. Every 4 years, your college team is allowed to take an overseas trip.
Yes.
That doesn't mean they do. Some guys can't afford it. They don't do it. But when you make that overseas trip, you're allowed 10 extra practices and you're allowed 3 scrimmages. That is a big advantage. There were 69 teams this year that took trips this summer. We're going to talk about one coming up, Pittsburgh, which I think is going to help them against West Virginia in our marquee matchup. But take a look at that list, and if these teams are exceeding expectations, a lot of that is that camaraderie. The team bonded. They got these extra practices. They played good competition overseas. So it's something you need to be aware of and keep track of as you are looking on to play on these teams, or perhaps in situations where you're looking to play against them.
Yeah, and listen, you can make the numbers look anywhere that you want, guys. It's just a matter of, and why we tell you all the time, there's no end-all, be-all, no magic pill. There's no one thing that is going to, one stat, trend, anything along those lines that should be, that's it, guys. That's all it's going to be. I just 10-0. They got to win. Yeah, no. And Ralph and I will tell you all the time, our teams that need and have to do something, Ralph, how does that usually work out when we say, well, they got to, right? It's got to happen. Yeah, when it's got to happen, you can count on it not happening, because that's exactly how it works, especially in college basketball, Ralph.
Yeah, you know, Joe, I'm gonna add college football into that the most, and that's going to be coming up. And just let's tell our viewers a quick lesson.
Sure.
I mean, when teams have 5 wins and they need to get that 6th window of bowl, that doesn't mean they're going to try harder. They've been trying as hard as they can. It just has increased pressure on them to get that 6th win.
Yep.
They're starting to feel that situation, looking at their schedule and going, well, we need to win 2 games, and this one we're probably not going to win. So it's also a situation that when they fail, I've given this angle out on, several times on the Sports Grid TV show and You Bet On It, the Wager Talk football show. When teams get that 7th loss and their goals aren't reached, all of a sudden they start to fade away. So, in basketball, it's a long season. Couple losses early don't really matter, but that's what you're studying when you're looking at these numbers. And Joe, hey, speaking of numbers, you know, I love this segment. I know our viewers love this segment, and you have access to some backdoor data, which really helps us. And we like to go over 3 separate things each day: the biggest movers since the overnight lines were posted, the biggest percentage bets on sides and totals, and the games that are bet the most. So first, tell us about the biggest movers since the overnight lines were posted.
It's interesting, Ralph. We've got a couple of switches here. We've got some interesting line movements in a couple of games where we went from one team being favored to another, to the original underdog being favored, happened overnight. One of them is going to be one of the marquee matchups that we'll talk about, West Virginia and Pittsburgh, that opened up as a pick'em, but we have seen that line move towards West Virginia right now. Another interesting one, Ralph, that we've seen a big move. We went with Rhode Island taking on Alabama. Now, Rhode Island opened up as a 2.5-point favorite. That's moved in the complete opposite direction, where Alabama in some places is already a 2-point favorite. So a 4-point swing in that, with Alabama, Rhode Island, West Virginia, Pittsburgh, and there's another one also that opened up as Lafayette there, taking on Youngstown State. Lafayette opened up as a 2.5-point favorite. It's been bet down to a pick-em at this point here, Ralph. So a couple of these, we do have a lot of games on the board, or it went from 17.5 to 17, and but it's interesting where the books come out with a low number, like a 2 or a 2.5, and then all of a sudden, Ralph, in 24 hours, less than 24 hours, we've got the wrong team favored again, and now it's kind of switched. So will we be seeing a lot of this, you think, throughout the upcoming weeks?
What you have to remember is that, one is an important number of basketball, but when you're crossing over 0, you're losing a number there. So a 4-point swing from 2 and 2 isn't the same as a 4-point swing going from 3 to 7.
Yep.
It's completely different because you're talking a basket each way. A couple more that, we're looking at some Power 5 teams, and I call them Power 5 teams, the bigger conferences. California opened up 2.5 against Cal Baptist. I see 4.5, and UCLA. UCLA finally has some backers now with Cronin playing some defense there against my Rebels. That was 6.5. I'm starting to see some 8.5s. Well, Joe, take us now. The next step that I love to know is, I'm going to go back, and there's not a person in this industry who doesn't agree with this statement. If you are going to follow line moves in any sport,
right,
it's college basketball in November, because the public is not betting college basketball like they're still in football mode. They're in NFL mode last night. We have 2 college games in football tonight. We have a complete college football card tomorrow. So college basketball, those people ahead of the line moves are usually very good. So tell us which games have been bet the biggest percentage on either sides or totals.
I'll tell you, I'll give you an idea. There are some 7, 8, 9-point swings in totals from opening to where we are right now. You're seeing it in Western Michigan, Mississippi. It's almost an 8-point swing. Opened up at 144. It's down to 136. It's also a pretty heavily bet game, which I found interesting there. When it comes to the sheer number of bets, though, there is one game, Ralph, that is just, it seems to be heads and tails above everybody else here, and that's Howard taking on Robert Morris. This is going to be a game that's probably going to get underway by the time you guys see this here, but that was one of the biggest. It's almost 3 times the amount of bets that I'm seeing across at other places. Early afternoon game, Montana State, Appalachian State, which is interesting to me. They've got a boatload of tickets written on them. And Gonzaga, Texas A&M seems to be taking the big number right now, Ralph. That's a 9 o'clock Eastern time game here tonight. Gonzaga taking on Texas A&M seems the one to have garnered the most interest right now.
Joe, any of those sides or totals getting 80, 85% of the monies on one ways where, sometimes we know that it depends who bets the game. Sometimes casinos get action and they don't move games. So we could have a high percentage and still not be one of those games where the line moved a lot.
Right.
Any 85 or 90%ers from that are out there?
It's interesting, too. Well, you had mentioned earlier over there. Actually, you didn't. I was looking at this early over here. But one of the highest percentage, one of the biggest mismatches right now, Cal Irvine. And correct me if I'm wrong. And Cal Irvine was pretty good last year, weren't they, in the tournament? Bunch of big guys out there blocking shots, but they're taking on Boise State. And Boise State's getting that 80% of the bets, 90% of the money situation right now, which I thought was strange. And so is Gonzaga. Gonzaga is absolutely at that 80% and 90%, 80% tickets, 90% of the money. They seem to be getting everything. Only about 20% of the tickets on Texas A&M for practically no money here, Ralph. And one of the other big games, not as heavily bet, but certainly all the money is coming in. Auburn taking on Cal State Northridge. Auburn, 85% of the bets, 92% of the money. So we're starting to see some of the bets come in, but they are, you can tell who the money is going to, and not just the tickets, but also all the money in this particular case.
And a lot of times early, we're going to find that they like to fade the poor teams. Northridge was a bad team. Cal Baptist against Cal wasn't a bad team, but they're a team that just moved up from Division 2 years ago. So often more when we continue the show and we get into January and college basketball volume explodes, the bowls are over and conference play starts and people start betting basketball. We're clearly going to see the big name teams get the percentage of money, while those smaller name teams, even if they're having success.
Well, how about Gardner-Webb? They were didn't they make the tournament there? Weren't they a play-in, I believe, there? Or was it last year or the year before? North Carolina right now, 85% of the bets, 98% of the money. But believe it or not, almost 20% of the tickets coming in on Gardner-Webb. Some people taking the 25 points that you're giving them in that game.
There's a lot of situations here that these coaches that are elite coaches, some need to win, some don't need to win. Gardner-Webb is a team that won 23 games. They lost to Virginia last year. They are bereft of some starters this year, and they played a Furman team, which they were supposed to lose to, but only lost by 7. They went on the road against West Carolina and lost their last game. So they come in 0-2. One loss wasn't good. One loss was a fine loss. So, you're looking at a team that has struggled. They've turned the ball over a lot the first 2 games, and that's that could spell trouble when their next 3 games are at North Carolina, at Wichita State, and at South Carolina.
It might be a problem, but I got to tell you, there is one game here, Ralph, and we'll get to these moneyline bets. When you look at the board, it's interesting because Alabama, Rhode Island, and I find this fascinating. At 7:30, we talked about the discrepancy. Alabama's getting 55% of the tickets, getting just about 80% of the money. And that's with the spread. They're also getting above 50% of the money line bets, the money in the money line bets as well. A very small percentage of the money line bets, but a very high percentage of the money line money. What are we missing with Alabama, Rhode Island here? Rhode Island opened up as the favorite. Now it seems to be everyone loves Alabama.
Well, I have Alabama as the better team. Of course, you're going through changes. You get a new coach and, you get rid of Avery Johnson, and you can't do a better job than getting Nate Oates from Buffalo. I mean, what he did with the Bulls was an incredible job.
Yep.
So, but what happens? You have a new coach, you have a bunch of new starters, and you host Penn in the opener and you lose. So, I guess they feel that all is right after beating Florida Atlantic at home, but I am not so sure. I actually favor Rhode Island, and, when I see these money moves, yes, I take note, but in my mind, not to be cocky, but for those that downloaded the preseason guide, they know the work I put into the preseason. Unless there's injuries I'm missing, then I don't really worry about where the money goes. If it's a team I haven't followed much or haven't watched or haven't read about, I'll take note and then go and catch up on that team. But again, for a novice, I'm not one at all to say back line moves, with the exception of November college basketball.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting because you will start to see, North Carolina, Gonzaga. You start going through all the big names, and then you start looking at some of these percentages. You're like, oh yeah, because it's true, Ralph. Some people, even the folks that might not be as in depth to it, they go with the big name teams. They go with the blue bloods. That's what they bet. And, even if it's a bunch of $5, $10, $20 bets, it all adds up after a while, Ralph. And then that's what kind of pushes the percentages out of whack a lot of time.
Oh, absolutely. Again, it's different where tickets. Yeah, I think where you see those blue bloods, that in December will be where we see tickets 80% one way, money 70 or 80% one way, because one person betting a few $1,000s, is as many as 30 other bets for people betting smaller amounts.
Important to understand that, guys. So the numbers It's always a good thing to follow because it is a market one way or the other. But all those numbers got to lead us to some sort of dog situation here tonight there, Ralph. Is there anybody barking on the card that you've looked at that you're like, kind of like this?
Well, we both chinsied out. I don't know what that word is yesterday. But again, we had a very limited card. So, we're going to count it as a win still, even though it was only 2.5-point dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I am looking at Minnesota tonight. I'm a fan of the Gophers.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are very tough. They were off a battle against Butler. The Utah team, people look at the Utah team and it's like, wow, look at what they did. They beat Mississippi Valley State 143-49, the largest ever Division I college basketball winning by 94 points. So your numbers are going to be a little skewed when you win by 94 the game before you play Minnesota.
Yep.
To me, that just came so easy. Utah played Nevada in the opener. That was a game that was tough, but that was a team where you had a new head coach and you had 5 new starters for Nevada. Mm-hmm. And then you play Mississippi Valley. You're not tested. I think Minnesota is going to give them a struggle, and I think Minnesota can pull the outright upset.
Oh, I love that. I'm actually looking at that line right now here, Ralph. Very nice.
Joe, any money line dog that's pulling out for you that you might sprinkle something on the money line with?
Yeah, I was gonna go with Monmouth over Kansas, but then I thought better. But I know, again, it's not one of these. I find this, Ralph, this game, it was one of my favorites to look at. Baylor is taking on the Texas State Bobcats. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but Baylor just struggles to cover spreads, especially at home. At least they have recently. I know it's a new team. A lot of people are looking at Baylor telling me how good they're going to be this year, like the football. They're 1-1 going into this game tonight. They lost against the Huskies, a pretty damn good team. I believe that was in Alaska. Texas State has only one loss on the season, and it was 7 points to Air Force. I think there's a possibility here. Again, you can catch the Baylor Bears sleeping. If you're going to give me 17.5 points, I'll definitely take the points. I might sprinkle a little something there, knowing that Baylor's a new team, but they could be caught sleeping and taking advantage here.
The actual number, Joe, from the Wager Talk Guide, 6-7-1 as a home favorite last year. So that's not breaking down a big home favorite like they are, but just to give people an idea, they were below 500.
Yes, so it's but again, new team. They've been traveled, so this will kind of give them an opportunity. But it's definitely something. I'll grab the points with Texas State. I'll also sprinkle a little something on the money line there, Ralph. And we do have some situational spots here. Did you find one today? Maybe a revenge, a sandwich, a letdown? Is there something on the board here today you like to take a look at?
I have a system, Joe, and this is actually valid tomorrow on Saturday, not for tonight. So remember the difference between an angle and a system. A system is a situation that if any team is in that situation, it works for any team. So it's something you can write down, look at, see if you could find again. And the situation makes great sense to me. Obviously, that's why I'm using it here. In November, if you fade a home team that is off a loss as a favorite, and they're playing an opponent that won as a dog. So you're at home. The team who is at home perhaps is a little overrated. Okay. They lost as a favorite game 1. We don't know if they were overrated or they played poorly. On the flip side, we have a team that won as a dog. Did they play extremely well, or perhaps are they a little underrated? So the important part of it is in November, because it's still early in the year. You're feeling these teams out. And if you fade the team, I think most people think, oh, you're off a home loss, you're going to bounce back, you're the favorite, you're going to be that team that's that good. Well, maybe in January and February and March that happens. Right. In November, if you fade that team, you've gone 8-26 against the spread. That's 23.5%, or a 66.5% fade playing that team that won as an away dog. That situation says to fade Loyola of Chicago tomorrow and back St. Joe's. St. Joe's look very good, and they're upset over UConn. They have a brand new team as well. But again, that system is 8-26, 23.5% in November. fade a home team that lost as a favorite against a team that won as a dog.
Interesting. I love this. See, these are the kinds of things that get the wheels turning, folks. That's what we love here, is you kind of look at these numbers, again, keeping in mind, no end-all, be-all, but, you know, Ralph also gave a couple of tips there yesterday on shows here on Wager Talk regarding, you know, some of those trends, Ralph, some of those situational spots. The Steelers were in one of them again last night. That proved to be a winner, but I don't think anybody would go out and just drop money on a play because of a situational spot or a sandwich or a revenge, but it should definitely be a determining factor in what you guys, when you're looking at the card. And it really, a lot of times, Ralph, even when you do, when we talk about games, it's those situational spots, those revenge, those letdowns that it's kind of the deciding factor that pushed you over the edge is what makes you make a play.
It is. And when people are looking at trends and angles, if I could only say one thing on them, I would say this. If it's in the gray area to be a play and you have strong trends and angles, it would be a play. If it was the play that was one of your lower rated plays and there's trends and angles going against you, it would be a game that you would leave off. And remember, it is much better to leave off a winner than it is to put on a loser, because if you do both and you go 1-1, you're losing 10%. Yep. So again, the more conservative you are in that approach, the more of those 10% splits that you save, increasing your bankroll.
Yeah, and I love to say that too, because, you know, we put out this information and sometimes people are like, who needs that? Well, you know, all knowledge is power, Ralph. So anytime, the more knowledge you can have, the more places that you can figure out and get that knowledge from, the better off you're going to be. I mean, in fact, you got two marquee matchups here on tonight's card, Ralph. 47 games here on the card, and these two are very interesting in their own right, and the market movement associated with them is pretty interesting.
Well, it is. You know, let's talk about the Zags going to A&M. You know, the Zags have 3 players from Texas A&M. And, you know, a cool story is Amon Gillard. It was an A&M transfer last year, and his girlfriend or wife, I'm not sure, and his baby still live, you know, in College Station where he was for 4 years. So, you know, how exciting he gets to come home and no more FaceTime. He gets to see his 3-year-old daughter. So that's a hell of a story. They also have a couple kids from Texas, you know, Gonzaga's point guard. You look at Zags and people are going to say, how can they replace what they had? I mean, you know, this isn't Duke that gets the best recruits in the country. You lose Rue Hashimura, the number 9 pick. You lose Brandon Clark, the number 21 pick. You lose the leading all-time assist leader in Zags history. You lose another all-conference, first-team all-conference player, but you got transfers. You got an A&M transfer. You have a North Texas transfer. Remember, Tilly probably would have gone to the NBA too, but he got hurt when he was doing his testing, so he decided to come back. So this team is still loaded. My deciding factor is this. TJ Starks is still out for A&M. He's their point guard. He was their number 4 scorer, 12 points per game, 3.5 assists, 2.5 steals, and he's suspended indefinitely. I think he's the difference in the game and why I lean with the Zags tonight.
And let me ask you too, Ralph, because looking at the tempo of these two, Gonzaga averages around 14 seconds per offensive possession. So you also have a Texas A&M team, which I think will be the biggest test of the short season so far for the Zags on the road. They do play at least some defense, but when you have a team like Gonzaga is only taking 14 seconds between shots and possessions here, you probably don't need a whole lot from A&M to be able to get this to at least hit the over, which I think is a short number here at the 143 number.
Yes and no. You know, the reason I say that is, let's remember, I mean, Buzz Williams is still the coach. Virginia Tech last year was 334 in tempo.
Yep, that's true.
I think that it's just because who you've played. They don't have their point guard. They have to put point guards in there that they're playing a little faster than they want to get guys accustomed to it.
Okay.
But I think we're going to see A&M's tempo hit skids. I mean, because Buzz Williams has been one of the slowest faced coaches in the game in the last decade.
Yep.
Now, perhaps he changes at A&M, but I don't think he will. I think, that's the style he's accustomed to playing. That's the style that's gotten him success.
All right, so the other marquee matchup was is an interesting game, too. You talked about a little earlier, West Virginia taking on Pittsburgh, I believe, here, Ralph. And what do we got? This opened up again, flipped. We had a Pittsburgh being a favorite, and now West Virginia is also the favorite there. It kind of moved about 2.5 points overnight. So what do you like in this matchup?
This is one of the biggest tempo disparities we're going to have the entire season. In Pittsburgh, with Jeff Capel, they're one of the slowest teams. They're down in the 300s, and Bob Huggins with his he's number 16 this year, and he was, he's a top 50 guy. So the pace is the difference. West Virginia's won 3 straight. They play every year. These teams do hate each other. The players talk about how intensive a rivalry is. There's as much pressure on this game as there is in any conference game. We talked about the overseas travels, getting those extra practices. Pittsburgh was one of those teams this year. They went to Italy. They got 10 extra practices. They got 3 scrimmages. And I lean with Pittsburgh here. The reason is both guards are back from Pittsburgh. Both guards were true freshmen last year, and they went to Virginia, and they faced this Bob Huggins pressure, and they only lost by 10. Now, another year removed, these kids started almost every game for Pittsburgh last year. Both the backcourt starters are now sophomores. And, you got Xavier Johnson and Trey McGines for Pittsburgh. I think they can keep this game, and I think they do win this game. I like this Pittsburgh team this year. One thing to watch with West Virginia, you're going to get a full court press with Bob Huggins. You know that. Probably wire to wire. He rarely does it. And his size, half of his team is 6'7" or longer. These guys have wingspans that, how sometimes you see those defenders when you're practicing passing in the NBA, and those coaches have like fans on the end of them to trying to make the passing lanes even shorter. Well, that's like what it's like when you're playing West Virginia. So, great game to watch, contrasting styles. But Pittsburgh's off 3 straight losses. They're motivated to get this win. Again, motivation doesn't mean you're going to get the win. But with both guards back and having seen this same style last year, I do give Pittsburgh the edge.
All right, so it's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of pressure, a lot of game. But you're right, they returned 3 of the 4 top scorers last year. Pittsburgh also played a couple of games. I do believe West Virginia's only got 1 game, right? They played, I think it was Akron was the first time around. So. Let's see what they got. Again, keep in mind that did open up with Pittsburgh as a favorite, but it did shift overnight to West Virginia. So, is there a best bet on this board here tonight, Ralph, that you're leaning towards?
Oh, there's always the best bet, Joe. Come on, we're not going to have our viewers have to watch us the whole time and not give them a best bet.
It's only 47 games. Just saying.
The unders keep hitting, and I want people to know that we've talked about it. And we're going to keep talking about it as long as they stay where they are. It's been over 59% to the under. Is that the 3-point line getting moved back? We're not sure yet, but it did get moved back. I think 6.3% is the actual number, and there are fewer 3 points getting made than there was last November. And I'm going with an under. It's a game where, for years, everyone's accustomed to watching UCLA run the ball. Well, Cronin, now the head coach who comes from Cincinnati, if you pop a balloon with a pin, that's about the pace that Cincinnati used to play with, and that's the pace that's coming to UCLA. And some people in Los Angeles say, well, I want an up-tempo style. Well, you've had an up-tempo style for a lot of years, and it didn't work. How about trying a style that plays some defense? UNLV is also a very slow-paced team this year with TJ Osselberger, the old South Dakota State head coach, They're number 333 in average length of possession. It was a war against Kansas State, and they only scored 116-point games, and that was in overtime. I think we're going to see another drag-out battle game where the winner is 60 points. First one to 60 wins the game.
Oh, I love that. All right, Ralph going under there, and you know what? I'm gonna go over in a matchup here, and I think it's going to be a fun game. We talked a little bit about them earlier. How about Youngstown State, University of Louisiana Lafayette? And I thought Youngstown State, they kept it close with Louisville. I think we can all agree Louisville is going to be one of the top 10 teams here in the country. They were only down 7 at half. The Penguins return almost their entire roster. They score points. They love that, and I got to believe Youngstown State is all about offense, right? There's very little defense with them. They put up 67 shots per game. This is a team that can chuck it up there. You have Quisenberry and Bohannon averaging 12 points apiece. The number, it's a little high. It's one of these that's up there at 157, 157 and a half, but I do think this game has shootout written all over it here, Ralph.
I can't argue with that. One thing I'm going to throw in about the Penguins is last year they were 0-3 as a home favorite, but they were 7-1 as a home dog. So when they were at home, the favorite went 10-1. I think we might see a change from that. They pulled a couple upsets left. Jared Calhoun has that team playing well, and when people have to come to Youngstown in the horizon, it's a team I have circled this year to play on.
Louisiana has, I think they've scored at least 85 in 2 of the 3 games, guys, also hitting 40% from three-point range. So they're hot. They're seeing it. They're shooting it. They're getting some success, and you gotta love the opportunity there to throw up 80 points apiece there and hit the over in this matchup. So there you got it. You got best bets here, Ralph. We got some dogs that we like here, and of course we got a whole lot of numbers and the ability to, I don't know, a whole lot of games, Ralph. How many games we got over the weekend here? I stopped counting at like at 60 some odd games. It's going to be another big weekend in college hoops, Ralph.
It is, and again, for those that follow every day, the weekends, Joe and I are still working on football and doing those things, so we won't have a show, but, we'll be back on Monday the 18th, and Monday's a pretty abbreviated card, maybe only 20 games, but, hey, we'll still go through the process. We'll go through the biggest upsets for the weekend, those biggest scores, those biggest covers for Saturday and Sunday, and there's always some action on Monday. UCLA playing again on Monday after playing tonight. They host Southern Utah, and Colorado and Irvine, the Irvine team you just talked about.
Yep.
So imagine Irvine in that back-to-back in the mountain areas, little altitude. We'll see how they come out of that 2-game stretch.
So much we can learn here early on. It's going to be a big weekend, and the one thing we can always tell you is patience, guys. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. No need to bet every damn game on the board here, but have some fun, enjoy yourself, make it a profitable night. Ralph and I, of course, will be back on Monday recapping it all, getting you ready for next week in college hoops. In the meantime, make sure you guys head over to wagertalk.com. Get there, guys. Ralph's plays will be up there all weekend long tonight. Whatever it is he's got, you'll have access to it at wagertalk.com. At CalSportsLV on Twitter. Guys, enjoy the weekend. Best of luck to you. Ralph, as always, my friend, enjoy your weekend. Make it a profitable one, and we'll talk to you again on Monday, man.
Thanks, Joe. Talk to you Monday, bud.
You got it. It is the Happy Hour Tip-Off Show brought to you by wagertalk.com. Good luck, guys.